Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, I must say, Phil, great show last week, and I can say that because I was a listener. I was on holiday, I tuned in, and many thanks to Carl Davis for sitting in for me, or standing in, I guess. Did a great job, and it was fascinating listening to it because you had that three-way conversation with yourself, Carl, and Steve Whitten all live.
Yes, I let myself in for that one.
Yeah, that sounds that was good fun to do.
It was, yeah. I mean, we've never had a great. It's always been a challenge, and it's sometimes when we have three people on our podcast. But no, it worked well. It was good to have Steve on as well, in person rather than his pre-recorded Men-Able moments. But it was good to have a chat with him, even though he was rushing to get a train, and my voice was starting to give up for the second time partway through that conversation. But no, it was great, and Carl does work in that mental health and wellbeing space as well. So it was a good conversation around what's happening in that sector there. But you're back, and you had a lovely break down at the Farmer's Dog. Is it that right? Farmer's Dog?
I did visit the Farmer's Dog, famous from Clarkson's farm, and thumbs up. It was a good dining experience. Customer service there was outstanding. The food was good.
And you have high expectations, don't you? So.
Yeah, absolutely. But I must say, anyone who's watched the show, any of the teething problems that they had and was obviously filmed, they're all sorted out. It is very, very slick and a good place to visit.
And you had some nice weather as well, didn't you, for it? So I think you had a good week off, a good break, and well deserved as well. So, but back in the hot seat. So we've got a bit to get through today. So strap yourself in, grab a coffee, grab a cup of tea, or something a little bit stronger, depending when you're listening to the podcast today. But we've got a few shout outs to begin with, and I'll take the first one, and this is in AM Online, and this is the Barbara Cox Woman of the Year Award, which was for 2025, and Jackie Barker, a friend of the podcast, and Keyloop, handed over the mantle this year to Davina Sarana. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. And Davina is EV campaigns manager at Green.TV Media. And she's been crowned the Barbara Cox Woman of the Year in recognition for her leadership, creativity, and commitment to gender equity and the automotive and sustainability sector. So fantastic result there. And I did watch this virtually. So I got to hear from a lot of the speakers and the little chats and the panel sessions I had there, and a fantastic event there, and brilliant and well done there to Davina.
Yeah, and you know what, this is very much sort of firmly established on the automotive car retailing calendar now, isn't it, as an annual event. It's a great event, some good winners that have been named over the years, and worth just shouting out some the finalists this year, because they included Amy Jane Marsden from ProTech, Jess Shannon from Jet Social, Linda Ennis from Ennis & Co., Amy Lancaster Hall from Bowker Motor Group, Sarah Noble from Deloitte, who was highly commended, and as you say, the overall winner, Davina Sarana from Green TV Media. So, well done to everyone there.
Yeah, and a nice little message in here from Martin Forbes, president of Cox Automotive International, who praised this year's exceptional field of nominees, saying that Davina stood out for her vision, energy, and ability to drive change, proving that leadership and impact aren't defined by age. Sarah's values-led leadership and dedication to empowering women have left a deep and lasting legacy. So a nice little statement there on to the winner of the Woman of the Year Award 2025.
And our thanks to Layla Moss Kelly from Ben, who notified us that Ben, our industry's hardworking charity, has just launched its Industry Leader Challenge. And talking about some of those sort of annual events in the industry, this is certainly one of the big ones. And this will be March next year, and it's going to entail scaling a vast glacier in Iceland. As I say, that'll be March next year, so that'll be nice and cold then. So this extreme expedition will see 24 of the automotive industry's boldest leaders skiing and trekking through sub-zero temperatures, dramatic terrain, and by battling isolation in the name of challenge and charity. Now, there's up to 12 teams of 2 and being required for this, and they need to raise a minimum of £25,000 per team, and that all goes to Ben. And so far, teams from LKQ, Euro Car Parts and Hella have already signed up to take part, and there are limited spaces available. So if you are interested or want more details, do contact Matt Wigginton at matt.wigginton, that's WIGGINTON at ben.org.uk, or visit the Ben website. But teams of 2, Phil, is that one for you and me?
Yeah, let's do it, Curtis.
Do you like the cold?
No.
You're a hearty northerner.
I'm a hearty northerner, yes, who stays indoors. As many will know listening to the podcast. But yeah, maybe it's for you. Yeah, maybe. You've done your London Marathon. Or is that it now?
Well, I've certainly hung up my running shoes, my long distance running shoes. But no, this is going to be a really good event, and we will provide updates as more teams sign up to this. So, good luck to Ben.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I know I mentioned it, I think, on last week's podcast, but Ben have a celebration due up on the 10th of July. Where they're inviting trustees, both past and present, to celebrate their 120 years of being in place. So that's on the 10th of July down at the British Motor Museum there. So really good things coming out of Ben at the minute, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And a shout out for the Car Dealer Power Awards, which were announced this week. We would urge you to head over to the Car Dealer website, because they've done a really good job in presenting these awards. It's over many categories, including manufacturers and suppliers, and there's a really good video with James and Batch going through the winners. So far too many for us to name now, yes. But just to give you a taste, the manufacturer of the year was BMW. So, a good showing there for BMW.
Yeah, definitely. And then after the break today, please do stay tuned, and you'll have the pleasure of listening to the latest top tip from Ian Godbold, where he'll be looking at how to drive in-market buyers to dealer websites and sharing the best KPIs to use when doing so. So do stay tuned for that after today's midway break.
Yeah, and you know what, Phil? He actually recorded that outside, and it sounds though maybe he was doing a bit of training for Iceland, because there's a howling wind. That one. So
maybe he's in practice for the Ben. No, that's what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And also check out our special weekday pod exclusive with Cap HBI's Jeremy Yeh. So that went live on Thursday, and that's Jeremy discussing June's used car trade values and providing an exclusive look at some of the standout trends over the first half of the year. We'll have an extract from that shortly in today's pod.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Powered by Motors.
Headlines this week come from Car Dealer AM and Motor Trade News, as well as The Guardian, starting with Cap HPI reveals June's trade values. We've got the industry's reaction to the government's new industrial strategy, with a thumbs up from the SMMT and a thumbs down from the IMI. So we'll look at both those reactions. Cox Automotive reveals its latest used car forecast for 2025 as it highlights welcome stability in the used car sector. New consumer research finds low awareness for most new entrant Chinese brands, although that's not proving to be a barrier to purchase. We'll also reveal which Chinese brand is actively considering building a production plant in the UK. And we'll finish off this week with a look at Vertu Motors' update on Q1 trading. So starting this show with the first of those stories, here's Cap HPI's Senior Valuations Editor, Jeremy Yeh, taking us through the headline trade value movement for June.
Let's talk about the sort of June figures as we move into July at that 3-year 60 point, and what is the headline figure, and how does that compare to previous June to July movements from within the live data?
Okay, so we end the month ended a 0.6 down, which is really positive, especially for June into July for monthly products. Average seasonal movement is a 1.1% drop, so 0.5% stronger. I think that really does signify another solid and stable month. I don't want to keep talking about the S as we did on previous pods, but it is there. It still exists in the market. A really, really good month overall. Positivity. There are some exceptions to that, which we'll come on to in a bit. In terms of how that, I guess, looks at when you look at previous June into July, last June to July was the strongest at 0.1 down. But you've got to remember and then put it into context that there was a really sharp alignment at the back of 23. During that last quarter when values moved sort of over 10%, which was a record really in any given last quarter. So that sort of brought in stability through the beginning of last year, a really good year. So hence why it went down 0.1. The year before it went down 1.4. So there was that was the start of the realignment of 2023, if you like. 2022 was a 0.9%. So a 0.6 is the second strongest movement we've got on record if we exclude the two COVID affected, or the back end of coming out the other side of COVID, 0.6, and that was down in 2018, and that was the year we dubbed the year of the used car. So yeah, it's been a really, really good and interesting month.
Now, Jeremy, we'll look at fuel trends in a moment, but before we do, were there any notable price movements by age points for the month?
Yeah, it's all quite, I guess, similar across the age points, actually. The 1 year 10K, that was down 0.6. That equates to about £175. A 5 year 80, that went down 0.7 to slightly more than the 3 year. But again, small pound note movement of around £70. And 10 year 100K, down a bit more, 1.6% overall, but 1.6% of a smaller pound note movement equated to just over £60 movement. So again, pretty good across the board. I think it's interesting when you look at what we saw going through the month. The month of June sort of brought in, I guess, week on week, like improvements, and that was improvements in price performance, and that was improvements in conversion. It's probably important to highlight that a lot of prices didn't exceed cap clean, but they certainly edged closer back towards cap clean week on week through June. So yeah, there was more players coming back into the market. A few more franchise dealers around, giving a bit more competition to maybe some of the supermarkets and independents. Yeah, and ended up to be a really good month.
And how did the various vehicle sectors perform? I should imagine the prospect of good weather meant it was another good month for coupe, cabriolets and convertibles.
It was, yeah. Coupe Cabriolet went up 2%, just over 2% at 3 years 60, and True Convertible, they were down. Went up 1.1%. So again, another month of, I guess, carried on the good weather, the seasonality anyway. Yeah. But yeah, we've had a long period of good weather, and it's likely set to continue for a little while yet, I think. And yeah, that's definitely, they've ridden a wave of good feeling, I guess, in the market. If everyone's been enjoying some good weather.
Yeah, and not such a good month for MPVs, was it?
No, MPVs did fare the worst. They're down 2.4% again. That was on top of 2.5% last month. So they've really fallen out of vogue, I think, with some buyers and retailers potentially. Might be a little bit of conditioning that as well in terms of coming back from certain channels. But yeah, I think the rise of the SUV sector, I think, has overtaken some of the MPVs, and you could probably argue it's a bit of a dying sector. But yeah, in terms of the other sectors, everything more or less fell in line. Certainly the mainstream sectors fell in line with the overall average. The strongest in terms of the mainstream was Supermillion. That was down 0.4 at 3 years 60, which is really positive. Lower medium, the sector I look after, which is the medium-sized hatchback, that was down 0.6. Upper medium was the A45 series. That went down 0.6 as well. But SUVs overall, the largest by far in our data feeds across the market, only down 0.7. So yeah, really, all the mainstream sectors bang in line with the overall average.
Well, as we always say, Phil, there's plenty of detail in the full interview, but that's just a little teaser, which just gives a bit of context to June, which, as Jeremy says, minimal movement, 0.6, very much in line with those seasonal averages, and a welcome return to more normality than certainly we've seen over recent years.
No, 100%, and I would recommend, and we always say it, to listen to that full interview there with Jeremy that was shared on Thursday of this week. But because we had a great conversation with Jeremy, just short of 30 minutes chatting about it. A lot of detail in the conversation this time. Want the Curtis particularly around that EV market and what's been happening in certain makes, models, and some of the rationale behind that as well. So if you haven't listened to the full interview, I would highly recommend having a listen to that, as always, on your podcast feed from Thursday of this week.
So turning to the first headline for the week from Car Dealer, and it's SMMT hails springboard for UK auto success as government lays out new industrial strategy. So this is the SMMT very much welcoming the government's new strategy for industries, saying it can be a springboard for UK auto success, with Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, laying out his 10-year industrial plan, which seeks to kickstart the stuttering economy and reduce the UK's reliance on foreign workers. Now, the Car Dealer report goes on to say that the plan for national renewal includes £275 million in skills investment to train Britons to do jobs in growth industries, which might otherwise require imported labour. And the strategy will very much include specific funding to train people for work in defence, digital, construction, and, crucially for the automotive industry, engineering roles. Now, in response to the announcement, the SMMT really offered its support to the measures, with Mike Hawes saying, "We welcome the government's strategy, a 10-year plan which answers our call for a long-term commitment to automotive manufacturing." And this is very much the key to this particular story, because it's the SMMT welcoming the moves as a trade body that looks after manufacturing. We'll get the retail view in a moment from you, Phil. And Mike Hawes goes on to say, with action to reduce electricity costs, upskill workers, and unlock finance, it lays the foundation on which we can build our future. So very much the thumbs up there from the SMMT.
They were obviously, I mean, Jonathan Reynolds, MP, was down at the SMMT summit this week with Mike Hawes, where he spoke to the audience there just on the day after the industrial strategy was announced. But I mean, going over to AM Online, and as you say there, Curtis, it's there's a bit of negativity, and we know that there's a lot of detail, and it is worth having a look at the industrial strategy in a little bit more detail if you do get the opportunity. And I know the BVLA have shared a bit of an update on what it means for the automotive sector in terms of investment, things like the UK-Japan automotive collaboration, powering up EV production and other things like that. But Sarah Sellers at the IMI is not so supportive as what Mike Hawes is. And Sarah Sellers is the interim CEO there at the IMI, and she's really a little bit negative towards it, saying that it was the strategy for failing to address the needs of the automotive sector, particularly the 724,000 strong workforce operating outside of the manufacturing base. So, as you say there, Curtis, very much the Mike Hawes was on that manufacturing, that production side, whereas Sarah's really coming from this other side, and particularly that sort of labour side of the sector that sits outside that manufacturing, that is there saying that while the strategy outlines that 1.2 billion of investment in skills over the next decade, with a focus on, as you said earlier, with defence, construction, engineering and digital industry, the IMI said there is little recognition of the automotive's vital contribution to the economy and the UK net zero goals. And she goes on to say that the pre-election commitment to a dedicated automotive strategy appears to have been quietly shelved. So Sarah Sellers there, not holding back on the marginal slight disappointment to that industrial strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And heading over to car dealer for the next headline, which is Cox Automotive reveals used car forecast. Experts praise sector's stabilising force. Now, this is very much one from you, Phil, because I know you do a lot of work there in the forecasting for both used and new sales. And within this story, it's saying that Cox Automotive is forecasting that 7.64 million used car transactions will take place by the end of this year, with the sector remaining a stabilising force amid wider industry volatility. So what's driven this forecast there, Phil?
I think we're obviously looking at what's been happening in terms of that new car market over recent years, what's been happening in the wider economy in terms of that cost of living, pressures of inflation, and the slower decrease to the Bank of England's base rate. But we wanted to get it across that it's not all negative, that the fact that a stable year is a positive result, really, in many terms, that the market isn't slowing. There's a lot of focus on margin retention from the dealer network at the minute. We heard on Thursday of this week with that full of interviews with Jeremy that values are fairly stable at the minute, a return to that seasonality, as we always say. The call out with some of this is what's happening around that fuel market, the challenges around that EV. But it's, I think, the key, similar to the new car forecast of around that 2 million. 7.6, again, is going to be, what makes up that 7.6 million. But I think optimistically, a flat year or a marginal increase year on year, I think is a positive result considering what the headwinds we are currently facing in the sector at the minute.
And how much of an impact will those post-COVID cars have on your forecasting there? Because obviously we went into the pandemic, the new car markets dropped off a cliff, but then in subsequent years it began to pick up, and we're now starting to see some of those cars being churned and going into the used car sector. So any impacts there? You
are still feeling it, yeah. You're now in that sort of fourth and fifth year in terms of that marketplace. So, some of those older models were, as a result of the pandemic shortage through, what we went through in 2020, 2021, through that early point of the pandemic, and since then, the profile of vehicles has shifted, as we talk about a lot around battery electric vehicles as well. So, there's a lot going on in the market from a dealer perspective of those sales channels, those purchase channels, type of vehicles available. And, you know, to again, referring back to Jeremy, you know, the cost of some of those vehicles as well and availability of it. So I think behind all of this, there is a lot going on. But I think a 7.6 million new used car market on the back of a 2 million new car market would say a healthy-ish, stable market before we might start to see a recovery through sort of 26, 27, a little bit more.
And just to give that a bit of context, back in the day, the typical market was around 8 million. So we're not too far short of that.
No. I think if we get back to 8 million, that will be a very optimistic market. You know, the 8.3, I don't think is sustainable again ever. But no, I think positively, you know, 7.6, 7.7 million, I think is a healthy, profitable market in general for the retail network.
So we'll be back after the break with the latest top tip from our very own industry guru, Ian Godbold, who recorded this whilst out and about working with dealer clients.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media. Available on demand, wherever you are, on your podcast feed. Next up is car retailing industry guru Ian Godbold, sharing his top tips on how to steer your business to success.
Hello everyone, well here we are, the final weekend of Q2 and everything still to play for. The final big push to achieve used vehicle targets and new car sales. Today I want to talk to you about websites. Every dealer has one, and we know that consumers spend up to 14 hours researching their next vehicle purchase online. Now, we're all in the business of selling cars, and driving website traffic is important, but not just any traffic. We want to attract in-market buyers. These are the consumers who are actively viewing your vehicle detail page, known as the VDP. That's why it's critical to track this activity via Google Analytics 4, GA4. By doing so, you can monitor the percentage of VDP views, a key in market behaviour, and track the cost per VDP, a vital metric that will help you lower your cost per lead and your cost per sale. It's also essential that your pages are fully tagged, allowing you to track all call to actions and outbound links effectively. Another key page is your search results page, known as the SRP. Make sure this page is optimised with best practice, clearly signposted to the vehicle detail page and containing the relevant call to actions, such as inquiry forms or telephone numbers, and of course, fully trackable through GA4. Now, we've recently supported the launch of 3 new websites, 2 for dealer groups and 1 for independent, working closely with their developers to implement a full data layer. Now, as I mentioned in my last podcast, reference call tracking is crucial. With a complete data layer, you'll be able to pinpoint exactly where the consumer makes the telephone call from. Was it the home page? Was it the search results page? Or was it that all-important vehicle detail page, which typically indicates their intent to buy? Now, if you don't currently have a data layer, or if your existing setup needs improvement, speak with your web developers. If you need advice or assistance, feel free to get in touch. We're here to help. So guys, have a great weekend. Let's give it everything we can for that strong end to Q2 and a real fast start in Q3. See you all again very soon.
Well, another great top tip there from Ian Godbold, and really sort of homing in on something that is very, very important to dealers, and just sort of tracking. Some good points there about tracking those in-market buyers who are visiting their websites and how to do it and to do it consistently.
Yeah, I think he was at the top of Mount Everest by sounds.
Yes,
that win there, but it's we do like it. Him and Stephen Whitten, they're just recording these on the go. They're getting this information out there. So again, as always, I mean, these top tips coming out of Ian are valuable for the retail dealer network. Those little snippets of things that they may not be thinking about, or they may not. They may need to sort of include and have a conversation to incorporate. So, please, as always, if you do want to expand that conversation with Ian, you can message him directly on LinkedIn. You just find him, Ian Godbold, on LinkedIn there, or you can come to ourselves through the Motor Trade Radio at yahoo.com email address there. But Ian Godbold is obviously the guru for the digital marketing, new and used car sales consultant who works with franchise dealers, independents, and supermarkets across the UK and European sector.
Yeah, and I know that Ian has been super busy this week,
Yes,
and that was recorded very much on the hoof. So thanks for recording and sending in to us, Ian.
And heading over to AM Online now. And I know this is data from Motors in terms of their consumer insight panel of just over 2,000 car buyers. And this is that UK car buyers open to new Chinese brands despite low awareness, saying that the lack of awareness on the new entrant Chinese brands is not proving a barrier to purchase in the UK, according to the data from Motors there. So some great insight this, and kind of supports what we're seeing and hearing in the market. And I'm sure hopefully next week we'll talk about the half-year point for some of these Chinese manufacturers. But clearly the consumers are not too concerned, are they?
No, this speaks volumes about brand loyalty, which is something you and I, have experienced all the way through our careers in automotive. But it does rather suggest that with these new entrants, and certainly the volume of new entrants coming into the market, that traditional brand loyalties are sort of disappearing. And also we've got younger generation buyers coming into the market, maybe buying for the first time or the second time, and don't have that loyalty to a badge that maybe buyers did, several years ago, and certainly over the decades. Now, I did actually work with a team at Motors on this particular story. So I did see the data, and there's a couple of things that are just worth highlighting. So overall, just over half of buyers, 57%, are aware of at least one new car brand. And this is all about the sort of prompted awareness. So I think within the data, there were possibly 10 brands and asked, have you heard of this brand? And BYD, probably no big surprise, had the highest prompted awareness among buyers at 40%. NIO was in second place, but they only had 14%. So you can already see that huge gap between BYD and NIO. Now, NIO is an interesting one in itself because it's not on sale yet. So maybe that's just suggesting that it's getting the word out there, it's getting the awareness out there ahead of launch later this year. And NIO was followed by Jayco and Omoda, the Chery-owned brands, both at 12%, and they launched here last year, and GWM at 12% awareness, and they've been on sale since 2022.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, no surprise there with BYD. I mean, their consumer brand marketing has been strong, hasn't it, since they came particularly into the UK market there. As you say, NIO, there's a lot of media around NIO, but more around their technology, battery technology, with their battery swap technology and what they're doing in Europe there. So that might be driving that a little bit there. But as you say there, the gap between those bottom ones and BYD is quite significant. But as you'd expect with the branding, I think, was it the Euros they did?
They sponsored the Euros, and the timing for them was absolutely perfect because they the primetime television over throughout the Euros, and that certainly did raise awareness. But you know what? The lowest ranked new brand currently on sale in the UK at the moment is Leap Motor at just 6%, and that is surprising because that's being introduced by Stellantis. across its network as part of its cooperation with Leapmotor, the Chinese manufacturer. It's a joint venture, but awareness there is very, very low indeed.
You don't see or hear much on it, do you? I mean, we know about it, obviously, through
Yeah.
media and knowledge of the sector, but you don't see anything or a great deal on the brand. And, even when we were watching the car dealer awards, and there's no mention really within that as well. So, it looks like there's a little bit of work to do there. They're obviously establishing themselves, as you know, alongside current brands of the Stellantis in the UK there. But we'll see how this. It would be interesting if you did this in a year's time. One,
yes,
what the list looks like of Chinese manufacturers is the first question in a year's time. But two, what that brand loyalty starts to look like then.
Yeah, and you know what, the research, so it's part of the ongoing Motors Consumer Insight Panel research, and it found that despite these low levels of awareness of most of the new entrant brands, it wasn't necessarily a barrier to purchasing, as you mentioned earlier. And the stats behind that is that nearly 2/3, so 64% of buyers, actually said that they would consider buying from a new brand, with more than half, 54%, saying they would contemplate purchasing an EV from one of these brands. So really playing into that brand loyalty, and just how strong is the brand loyalty that we always associated with the automotive sector.
Yeah, and a great closing comment from Lucy Tugby, who's the marketing director there at Motors, saying that the research shows just how receptive car buyers are to new brands and how brand loyalty is no longer a prime consideration, and that the dynamics in the UK car retail market are changing rapidly, and younger buyers in particular are open to considering buying new or used cars from new Chinese brands rather than stay with the tried and tested European, Japanese, South Korean marques, and that the allure of affordability and the latest tech outweighing brand consideration there. So I love a little sort of closing comment there from Lucy on those key findings.
And staying with this theme, heading over to The Guardian, and the headline there is Chinese car maker Chery Auto actively considering building UK factory. Now, this has come out from the SMMT conference. They had a big industry conference last week, and Victor Chang, the UK director for Chery, and Chery runs the Amoda and Jaku brands. He was talking about the sort of long-term commitment and plans for the UK, for the brand, and he told the conference that the company was actively considering building a second plant in the UK as part of a localization strategy. And we actually had Victor on the podcast last year, and he did allude to it as far back as then that they certainly wouldn't rule out building a plant in the UK. So that's further evidence here that they are actively looking.
Yeah, and it would make sense. I know that one of the other brands has sort of said that they wouldn't do in terms of a plant or an assembly plant in the UK due to the energy costs of the UK, but they would look at potentially building an R&D facility, which is like what Shanging has done for the last 10 or so years. So I think really, I think clearly we've seen with these brands, with Amoda, JQ, BYD and others, in terms of their appetite now of building and investing outside of China, quite happy to do so. So, I mean, this would be a bit of a game changer if they did this, and a great boost for the UK if somebody like Chery did decide that they would put a second European factory in Britain. It would be a fantastic move. But as you say, with that friend of the podcast, when Victor was on, he did kind of say that nothing's off the table. Everything's up for consideration and discussion. So maybe this needs to go back into the government. Maybe there needs to be a sweetener on the table, as always with these kind of things, from the government for them to invest. But we'll certainly keep an eye on that. And heading over to the final story today, and another very good friend of the podcast is Robert Forrester, is that in the motor trade news, Vertu increased new car sales as used sales dip, saying that Motability sales were weak across the group's network, with a year-on-year decrease of 23.2% across March, April and May. And this has come from their AGM in terms of their recent announcement, and this is that they reported a 7% growth year on year of new car sales across those 3 months, March, April and May, compared to the wider market gain of 5.6%, but used car volumes decreased by 3.8% in that same period, which Vertu have attributed to reduced supply of used cars.
Yeah, strong performance certainly on the new car side there as well. And of course, their financial year begins in March, so it does capture the March plate change. So very strong showing there. And it also highlights that, used car volumes were down, but margins on used cars were actually up from 7.3% to 7.5%. So some healthy margins there. And you mentioned Motability sales. They were weak across the group's network, with a year-on-year decrease of 23.2% compared to a UK-wide decline of 18.5%. So clearly a lot happening there in the Motability sector.
Yeah, and Robert Forrester is quoted in this story saying, since the beginning of the financial year, a period which includes the most important trading month of March, as Curtis has just said there, the group has traded well in a challenging macroeconomic environment, saying that new retail volumes are up materially, with the groups benefiting from market share gains, and their high margin after sales business continues to outperform. So very positive news there from Robert. And we had a fantastic interview, didn't we, with Robert recently, that's still on your podcast feed if you've not had a chance to listen to that one. That was just ahead of these figures that Robert was talking about, their performance and his outlook for the rest of the year. That's really it for this week. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. As I say, please do have a look back through your podcast feed to the full interview there with Jeremy Yeh from Cap HPI. A lot of detail in this week's chat with Jeremy there, particularly around some of the context behind the headline figure on the movement within the battery electric vehicle market, and shares his outlook of what he's expecting as we move into the third quarter and July. Again, do listen to the full interview there with Robert Forrester if you've not listened to it already on your podcast feed from a few weeks ago. And as always, as we said there, with a little snippet there with Ian Godbold on his top tip. If you do need anything, then please do catch up with him on LinkedIn. He shares some fascinating little updates on his social channels, but do reach out, and he's always there to help and support your business if he can do so.
Well, that was a busy show, wasn't it, Phil?
It was. We kept up with it, though. And we thought managed to get through as well. And you're straight back into it. So, no, it's a great show.
But that is all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.